Hey there, Tony from Moonbound. I'm going to be talking about today how to make sure that you're choosing the right network for your blockchain project. Okay, so step number one, let's consider a very important factor, actually, several factors here in this case. Is we have to first look at your product, what your idea is. Okay, now from that, you have to look at your different utilities, and you're going to want to map out and determine at what frequency would people actually be interacting with this. So, for example, if it's a very high frequency, let's say it's like a game, they got to continuously use it. Well, in that case, what would be important wouldn't be transaction speeds, right? Transaction speeds would be critical for that. Furthermore, the price of the transactions would also be critical. Okay, whereas if, for example, somebody only had to interact with this maybe once a month, and let's say the value was high, the transaction cost maybe is a small fraction of that, then it doesn't really matter, does it? And so these are important factors that you have to be really carefully considering when you're building your blockchain project. Okay, so it's the transaction speed, it's also the value of the transaction. Okay, the other thing we want to talk about is the culture of the blockchain itself. Now, this might seem a little strange to you, but for example, Binance Smart Chain has a very different group of investors traditionally than like Ethereum does. Ethereum tends to have more long-term investors, whereas Binance Smart Chain tends to have people who are more into sort of pumps, gambling, that kind of stuff, just in my experience. It doesn't mean that you can't find the legitimate investors on BSC. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means that that's more of the trend that those investors tend to follow. Ethereum is where you tend to see things that are built more long term. Polygon is also catching on very nicely right now for gaming, okay? Because Polygon has good transaction speeds, has low costs, and a lot of other projects are using them for their actual foundations, okay? And so it becomes valuable now to actually determine, what blockchain you're going to be on based on the cultural aspects of that. So for example, if you're thinking like 4 or 5 years, you want to have something out there and you just start building only on Binance Smart Chain, that could be a big mistake, right? You might even want to extend that cross chain and think about that when you're in the early stages of your project, okay? Doesn't mean that BSC is bad, doesn't mean Ethereum is great. It just means that it depends on what you're looking to build, and you have to look at these factors, especially when you're talking about these different networks. They have their own culture to them. Don't forget that point and do look at that point. Now, the next thing I want to bring up is that of liquidity, okay? So when we look at the market cap, the total market cap of Ethereum, Binance Smart Chain, BNB, we look at Polygon, Solana, they're all different, aren't they? One is much higher than the other. So for example, you have Ethereum and BNB that are way high in total market cap, whereas you have Solana and Polygon that are much lower in total market cap, as an example, okay? So what that means is there's going to be less liquidity out there in that market as well. So for example, if you're looking to have something that'll go up really high in market cap, let's say hundreds of millions of dollars, well, it'll be very challenging for you to do that if the liquidity is low on something such as Polygon. It'll be easier on something like Ethereum, easier on something like Binance Smart Chain or BNB to make that actually happen. Okay, so that's one thing I definitely want to bring up. Now, this doesn't mean that you shouldn't consider something like Polygon. Now, in fact, what we mentioned earlier regards to transaction cost, speed, everything else. Now, I also am a firm believer, as someone who's actually had something go over $200 million and come back down, that isn't necessarily a great target to hit. It's more important to understand that these different networks have different amounts of liquidity on them with different investor profiles, different transaction costs, different transaction speeds. And it's up to you, the founder, to pay attention to these factors as you're putting everything together and deciding really what network that you're going to be on. I hope this brief video was helpful for you in making a decision and maybe brought up some topics that you weren't even considering. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next video.